All right, so today we're in Love and Torah part 38. Okay, now, we're in part 38. We are looking at the second of the two great commands at this point, right? The two great commands to love Elohim and to love your neighbor. And as I was saying, if you're watching this now, you wouldn't know, but as I was saying during our announcements, I think that we have to do a much better job of understanding how to love each other, okay? And what that looks like and things you can do that expresses love without it necessarily being a direct interaction. There are ways that you can do things that either make life easier or take some challenges out of the way and things like that. There's lots of things that we could be doing. But I just think that to some degree, as we are going forward in this teaching, it's 38 parts. I've said the same thing mostly in every part. Because the verses say almost the same thing mostly in every part. And yet I still see that we struggle. And we struggle with the connection between Torah observance and love being the driver that motivates what we're doing. And, we have in Philippians, I'm not going to go there today because we finished that last time, but I want to just kind of reset here. In Philippians 2, one of the things we talked about there was letting the mind of Yeshua be in you. Now remember, this is the Messiah whose whole life was focused on providing you with a way into the kingdom. In other words, everything about his life was an unselfish offering so that others could benefit. And yet, we're incredibly selfish beings. Selfish not because we're not generous, like getting stuff or giving to people, just that everything has to be about us. I mean, mostly we get bothered by and irritated by what other people do because it's not the way you would do it. Or you think it's wrong, or it's all about you. And that's really where we get the problem. I mean, I can't imagine if Yeshua felt that way, I can't imagine how he could walk among people without being driven insane with frustration and offense and everything else, because everybody he saw was doing things wrong. And he didn't choose, I'd say never, but he didn't really generally choose to address it. He addressed it with only, occasionally, the leadership. He really didn't address it with the people a whole lot. But yet, I'm sure he was frustrated on a continuous basis, And because after all, he was dealing with humans, with people. I don't want you to think for 1 second that there was any real big difference between you and the apostles in terms of being people, okay? They had all the same flaws, all the same issues. Some of them were more obvious because you hear about them, others you didn't get to hear very much. You got 12 apostles, about 8 or 9 of them, you almost never heard about at all. I mean, they just never did anything that got noteworthy. At least in the Gospels that you get to read, or even in Acts, you don't really get to hear much. But the few that you do are very real people, especially Peter. Kepha's about as real as it gets. Man, all you blues should love Peter, all right? Because he's got blue coming out of every pore in his body, And so, just understand that, he called them just like he called you, not to do their job, to do your job. But he called you and them because you're a person with all your flaws. And yet, what did he really want them to do if we kind of encapsulate it into something simple? He wanted them to care about everybody else. Now, they had a very specific role in that, right? But still, the idea was to care for and provide for the sheep. And so this is very important if we're going to understand this whole connection between love and Torah, that in loving ourselves, look, we have to have Yeshua's mind. Okay, that's what we covered last time, Yeshua's mind. And his mind was, he says, no greater love but to lay down your life for your brothers, no greater love. And so let's keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned this during the afterburn, but I think I want to put it in the actual teaching because not everybody listens to the afterburns. So how do we let this mind be in you, which was in Messiah Yeshua? And I mentioned then that we can do this through prayer by asking when we're approaching things, how we should approach it. Maybe through the Ruach, we get an inspiration from the Father as to how Yeshua would handle something, okay? Through study. Now, by the way, study doesn't just mean scripture. You got to study human behavior, study what makes us do what we do and why we don't do what we should do. Paul mentions that which I don't want to do, I do, and that which I want to do, I don't do. And he didn't have the resources you have to figure out why that is, okay? You have resources for that. I sneak a lot, well, I shouldn't say sneak. I put a lot of that stuff in the teachings as a resource. But there's lots and lots of available teachers, videos, books, audios, whatever you prefer to receive your information in, on whatever aspect of human behavior you need more information about. To understand why you do what you do and why you don't do what you should do. Or why you don't do, in other words, the Paul thing, right? I do that which I don't want to do and I don't do what I know I should do. And you can understand your particular, strain or version of the struggle. Because we all struggle with this, okay? But I don't struggle with it the same way you do. And the person sitting next to you doesn't struggle the same way you do. And, everybody struggles in different ways, but we still struggle. Okay? Can we all admit that? We are struggling to do what we should do and not do what we shouldn't do. And so you have to make the effort to study that. So yes, study is on my list here because it's studying the Word. But there's so much more you could study in addition to that to understand how to succeed where you struggle. Abba has allowed a lot of people over the centuries to observe and then identify what makes people do what, because they observe. And then they come up with, processes and techniques to address those things. And so, yes, I want you to study. I want you to study the Word. By study the Word, you know what I want you to do? I want to make sure this is not going to confuse or get me in trouble. Well, I don't care. So, look, the thing is, I want you to study, but not the way you may have thought. I'm not asking you to study the Word so you can teach it. I'm not asking you to study the Word so you can figure it all out and piece it all together, because study. I'm going to study this, and I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying that's not what I'm talking about. Study the Word so that the information is now available in you for the Ruach to connect together at the right moment. So instead of, because you could read, okay, so I've got in front of me John 14. It says, let not your heart be troubled, believe in me. I've got all these things. I can just read all of that. That's not studying necessarily. I may not remember it. But when you study it, and that means you're giving it a lot more intention and attention and your focus so that that stuff can go in and meditate on what is he saying, not trying to figure it out from a teaching point of view, just so you're actually like you're there and you understand the reason this is being said, who the audience is, and all that context stuff. Study it so that when life happens, the Ruach can grab a hold of one of those verses and bring it to your mind when it's appropriate. So it's not like study to figure out the calendar or study to figure out Revelation and Daniel and Matthew 24, whatever. I'm not saying not to do those things. I'm saying that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is to let his mind be in you, put that information in you where you have it in there well enough so that it can be retrievable and accessible, okay? So that when I'm teaching, you go, oh, I know the verse he's talking about, and I now understand what that means and where it's supposed to go. You have to be able to have that. Often people will hear me talking, and I have to always remember that when I go and quote a verse, if I just say the address, you don't necessarily know what verse I'm talking about. Just because I recite, the address, meaning the book and chapter and verse. And you don't need to remember the numbers of the address. Remember what was said. Like, that somewhere it says that you need to walk out your own salvation. You don't need to know exactly where that is. Probably helps if you remember Paul said it, so you can kind of get a sense of where it is, okay? But you should know the things that were said and in the context in which it was said. So study, okay? Part of your study means listen to the teachings so you understand how it was put together, how the verses fit together and how they lay together, and how a concept like covenant, or in this case, love and Torah, or salvation, or whatever it is, how that all pieces together scripturally. So you can use the teachings from that point of view. But these are all because the teachings are trying to give you an idea of what Yeshua's mind is. I'm trying to push that in your direction so you can receive his mind. Understand what he was thinking when he said certain things. What did he mean when he said certain things? Okay? And by certain things, I mean, because some things are more or less obvious and most people get it right, but other things are not so obvious. Okay? Meditation. There's two styles for this that I'm going to recommend. Transcendental and, I'm kidding, that was a joke. Okay? Okay, two styles of meditation, two approaches. One is just being quiet. In other words, just sit, just be quiet, or stand, or whatever. Or if you're walking, just quietly walking, just be quiet. And eventually let your mind finish sorting through life and everything else and quiet down and see what comes after that. Be in an open place of receiving, okay? And the second thing is to meditate on specific things. In other words, to dwell on and think about a single thing, okay? Maybe you're looking at a verse, and that verse says, let the mind of Yeshua be in you. Philippians 2:5 says, and let this mind be in you that was in Messiah Yeshua. So you may just want to think about, well, what does that look like? And, just meditate on, how does that apply to me, and how can I get that? Thinking about a single idea or thought. Meditate on that, okay? So those are two different ways I would like you to meditate as far as helping to get the mind of Yeshua into you. Especially if you have a section of Torah that you struggle with in terms of obedience. Well, then think about that one piece and meditate on that one area and try to ask yourself the question, why is it I'm struggling with my tithing? Why am I struggling with whatever it is? I don't know. Maybe it's wearing a tzitzit. You're a guy and you just, don't want to put them on. So meditate on that. But on meditating, look, I want you to get real with yourself. I want you to get real honest with yourself. And the way to do that is to ask questions, and then when you get the answers, dig under those answers. Let's say I wasn't wearing tzitzit. Obviously I am, but let's say I wasn't. And I was struggling to put them on and wear them as part of my Torah observance and my covenantal relationship, my behavior that goes with the relationship. So I can meditate and think, okay, why don't I want to wear them? And I may say, well, I do want to wear them. Okay, then why aren't I wearing them? Well, I may throw a little first quick thought out there, a defensive thought. Like if you were asking me, I might throw a little defensive thought out there. Then you have to ask yourself, is that really the reason? And if that is the reason, what about that is really the problem? And you'll go down and down until you figure out that there's a negative emotional space behind the reason you don't do it. It's fear, it's embarrassment, it's pride, it's something, okay? That's the real answer. But you have to dig. If you ever counseled with me, that's what we're going to do, okay? If you've ever counseled with me, I'm going to ask you questions. And by the way, I will already probably know the answer. I need you to say it, though. Now, because I just want you to know, it's not that I don't know, and maybe I don't, but just realize Abba gives me those insights and inspirations. And so when you give me an answer and I know it's not the right answer, I'm like, no, but what's under that? Or what's really motivating that? Or what else? Because I know what the answer is. Not because I'm so smart, but that's part of the anointing in counseling. Billy has seen that done. A lot of you have counseled, you know what I'm talking about. Because you give me the answer, and I'm like, no. And then you look at me, no, that's it. I'm like, no. But it's not because I'm thinking that. He's telling me that's not it, okay? And then you look at me like, then what is it? It's like, no, you have to say it. It has to come out of you. You have to see it. You can do this yourself. But it takes getting real, and we don't like that. It's scary. I'm not saying that in a mocking way. It is. It's scary. Not always. Like, once you've done it on a regular basis, you get used to it. You understand what reality is all about. But when you've really not lived in it, it's scary because it's an unknown. And so you don't want to do it. But you need to get real. You can't fix anything until you get honest with yourself and get real. Okay? That's why they do what they do, like in Alcoholics Anonymous, is make you stand up in front of everybody and in a very real way look everybody in the eye and admit you have a problem. And not just that you have a problem, that you understand what the problem is. And by the way, alcohol is not the problem. There's a reason why that person is drinking. That's what they need to figure out. What are you feeling that's causing you to go to this way of numbing that or avoiding that or whatever it is? And by the way, you may do things that you think are actually good things to do, but really you're doing them in an obsessive way because you're avoiding dealing with something else. Because you may be an obsessive house cleaning or this thing or some of the things like, well, I just do all these wonderful things. Yes, but are you dealing with stuff or are you doing stuff to avoid dealing with stuff? Because there's a clean house and then there's a clean house, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay? And there are people that will immerse themselves in something, it's their escape. See, the one thing Yeshua did more than anybody that's ever lived is that he was living in reality. Okay? You want to let this mind be in you? You have to live in reality. Yeshua knew everything that was real. He knew what was going on in your head. He knew why it was going on in your head. He knew what was going on in his own head, and he knew why it was going on. But he lived in reality. Most of us don't. Don't take that wrong. Most of us are still on, living in some level of partial delusion bubble. Okay? Sure, he popped your bubble enough for you to recognize that, whatever they were teaching you in the world or in the church wasn't true, so you came looking for him. And then he let you find him, and you found him in covenanting through the scriptural understanding of covenanting as Israel, in the relationship and the right way of seeing Messiah. You learned all those things. But that didn't mean that every aspect of your life was no longer in a delusion. He just popped one of many. And he may pop other ones as well. Look at the political delusion going on in the world right now, in this country especially. And by delusion, meaning there's a difference between what everybody is saying, I'm talking about the politicians, and what they're actually doing. There are disconnects between the words and the actions. And this is with a lot of people. But the problem is, here's what the delusion is. You believe what they want you to believe, even if it's not true. It's not real. Okay? And this is a big problem in the country now. There's a huge amount of effort to convince everybody in this country that everything and every moment you're facing racism. There is racism, don't get me wrong. But I've never heard it talked about the way it's talked about now. I don't even think they talked about it this way in the 60s when they're going through all the problems on the level it's on now. Maybe close, but this is not a reality. Okay? And reality sometimes comes in measure. In other words, yes, there is this, but it's not in the level that's being told. Now, maybe it's the other way around. There's things also, by the way, they're telling you is nothing, but it's big. Okay? And you need to be able to be in reality so you know which is which. And not be in, Tony Robbins is a very famous, right, motivational speaker and all that kind of stuff. He talks about how, the few people that can get to a place where they're no longer in state, that's what we call it, like a hypnotized state. And that's one of the things that when you study in those things, they talk about how a person who's going to, do something therapeutically where they want to hypnotize you, they need to get you into a hypnotic state, okay? A state where you just receive and you don't filter. A lot of medications and drugs try to get you into a certain state. But when you wake up, seems to me there's a bunch of verses in the New Testament especially that say wake up. What's the metaphor for waking up? You were asleep. And when you're asleep, are you in the real world? No, you're in a dream world. He says, wake up. And so there's this, and so if you want to wonder why the country and other places are behaving they are, because they're all now in a hypnotized state where they're just believing whatever's being fed to them in the conditioned state they're in. And they can be conditioned to believe anything. Anything. And when they're in that state, they're no different than when you find somebody who's not been eyes open, ears open for Scripture, because you walk that person through every verse that shows the Sabbath is not Sunday and the Sabbath is this and that. You can show them all those things and they can't see it, right? You can show them kashrut, they can't see it. It doesn't matter what you show them, they can't see it. Excuse me. Well, think of it. It's the same thing when it comes to all of these other things that are going on in the world you live in. This world, it's a world not his, right? Remember that teaching? Okay. Because the Father's allowed this world to not be his for a period of time. But you have to be in a place where you're in that clarity, right? The mind of Yeshua. How can you love him correctly if you're in a delusional mindset? How can you love each other correctly in a delusional mindset? By the way, part of the symptom of being in a delusional mindset is the susceptibility to just receive information and not need to validate it, check it out, verify it. See, you all have this problem, because some of you are thinking, well, I don't see the medical profession in the wrong way, and I see politics clearly, and I see religion clearly. Really? But what about when somebody comes up to you and starts talking about somebody else? Do you start feeling the way that person's trying to get you to feel about that other person, even though you don't know if what they're saying is true? Oh, but they're my friend. They wouldn't make stuff up. Not that they're making it up, but it's filtered through their emotional delusion bubble filters. Because you're thinking, well, I don't do these things. Well, look, I'm telling you right now, I talk to a lot of people, and I know that some of this is about me, for example, and some of it's about other people, but almost always I'm finding out that there are people talking about other people, whoever it is, and often enough it's each other, not me. But yet nobody is going to the person to find out what really happened or the other side of the story. And so you listen to that person. Husband and wife are fighting. Wife talks to her girlfriend. Girlfriend hears the way the wife described what happened. Girlfriend's not going to have any choice but to, at that point, it sounds like that guy's a horrible jerk, because that's the way she described him. Now, she doesn't know that to be true, but now her brain's going to wrestle to find any little evidence that could possibly back that up in the memory banks. This is not the mind of Yeshua. What would you do with the mind of Yeshua? You say, I appreciate and understand that I appreciate that you trust me enough to share this stuff with me, and I realize you're really struggling, but I'm only hearing your side. And I may never hear the other side, because maybe I don't have a relationship with the other person involved in the little debate, okay? But what you need to know is I'm not going to now feel about them the way you do just because you shared that with me, okay? I'm not going to have my feelings for someone be affected by just you telling me something you had an experience with. Now, that's information I'll put in the back here, pending further verification and validation from multiple witnesses or whatever. But I'm not just gonna go based on the fact that you're angry right now and you don't like that person, and so you'd like everybody to feel the way you do. That is not the mind of Yeshua playing out. Yeshua doesn't want everybody to feel the way he does. He wants you all to feel the way the Father does. But you want people to feel the way you do. See, it's not a Yeshua-like feeling. You talk to each other because you want that person to feel about the other person the way you do. Sometimes you're saying positive things, and the person you're talking to is like, I don't know them that way. They're not all that, but you want them to feel like you do. Why? Because it validates you. You want someone to validate your interpretation, your instinct, your decision, your feelings about the person or the situation. Probably why we'd spend so much time talking about people instead of talking about Yeshua and the Father and everything else. And people get frustrated with me because I don't play that game. It's very hard to get me roped in to feel about anybody what you want me to feel about them. Ask the people that have tried. It doesn't work very well. And it's just because I know you may be right, you may be wrong, but I can't know which one you are just because you're telling me what you experienced. Because it's being filtered through your negative emotional space. I know something happened and you're upset. That part I know. Do I know that you're justified? Well, according to your story, you are, but I have no idea. I have no idea what you've left out. I have no idea what you added or exaggerated. And you're looking like, well, I would never do that. Of course you do. Every time. Every time. Every time you make things bigger that were smaller, smaller that were bigger, and add things that didn't even happen. And it's not that you're trying to misrepresent. That's what happens through the emotional driving. When the emotions are driving, that's what happens. Okay? I surprise people when I ask them the question, okay, what happened? They tell me what happened. I said, okay, was anything happening before that that might have triggered that? And they look at me like, that's a blank. Because when you get upset, your time froze and started at that moment. Well, you know, he started blah, blah, blah. Well, what did you do before he did that? Nothing. What do you mean nothing? Did he or she just walk in and start screaming at you? Yes. No. Okay? Something happened. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that it justifies what they did. But let's kind of get back to reality. What happened? Not just the part that you're upset about, but what happened? So I just want you to make sure that we understand that you may want to meditate on a situation that happened and ask, Father, I'm going to think about this situation and I want to know what I did. If there's anything I did that may have triggered it, exacerbated it, or whatever, okay? So I can see. Not that you're looking to have it all be always your fault or anything, but just, did I do anything that could have sparked or contributed to the problem? So you can at least own your part, all right? And you can meditate on that. And you ask Yeshua's mind to be in there to give you clarity, to see, so that you can see things with that reality, not the delusion filter, but you're seeing it clearly, unfiltered. All right? Fasting. Okay, one of the other ways that we do things to let the mind of Yeshua be in us is fasting. And fasting, I probably need to do a teaching on this at some point, but fasting is about taking away things that interfere with your vibrational ability to connect vertically. Okay? Oh, that sounded so new agey, Rabbi. What are you talking about? Okay, so while you're sitting under your pyramid with your crystals, okay, so look, just because others use things for whatever they're using things for, and that was a joke for those who are watching, you don't know what I'm talking about, okay? We are all vibrational. Everything vibrates. Every physical thing that you see is still moving on some level. This feels very solid. That's just because it's very densely packed together. But this is not so solid as it looks. And so everything has a vibration. Your thoughts have a vibration. Everything you eat affects your vibration. There are things that enhance it, things that lower it. And the example I like to use is that of the old-fashioned radios. I'm old enough to remember. A lot of you probably are old enough to remember. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. But, you know, the old radios, you had to turn a dial to turn so that the radio can receive a frequency vibrating in the air, okay? And that's all of that stuff right now that is going on through the internet and everything else, and all of even my voice coming out of my mouth is vibrating in the air, and you have ears that take that vibration and process it into the sound. And so when we do things, feelings, negative ones will lower your vibration, positive ones will elevate your vibration. And so when we're trying to be vertical, I think you would probably guess that that is a high vibrational thing. Wouldn't he have like the highest levels of vibration? And so it's hard to really be tuned in when you're vibrating at such a low frequency. Not impossible, because he's designed it so that he can reach you at the bottom of your journey, so he can bring you out of your journey. But at times, when you really feel like I want to get more connected, fasting purges the low vibrational things out of your system so that you can, it's almost like a reset so that you can get your vibration back where it needs to be. By the way, it also help your health in a good way. And so there's a lot of reasons why when people wanted to get closer to Yahweh, they would fast. Now, part of it also is that when you're hungry, and then you become aware of the hunger, then you also become aware of why you're hungry, which is because you're fasting. And why are you fasting? Because I want to get closer to Yahweh. My mind now is focused. Okay? So you can use fasting to let the mind of Yeshua get in you. That's part of it. The last thing I wrote down was conscious effort and practice through self-awareness. Okay? So making a conscious effort to have Messiah's mind in you. So how do you do that? When a situation is going on, something is going on around you, is to consciously be aware of yourself and what's going on so that you can, with effort, say, okay, how would Yeshua respond to this? How would he feel about this? What would his mindset be in this situation that I'm dealing with right now? But you can't do that without two things. You have to, number one, be aware. Self-aware. What am I feeling right now? And is it the right thing to be feeling? The second thing is, you have to have the ability to create space between the things happening and your reaction to them. We are so reactionary and so quick to respond that there's almost no space between action, reaction. So there's no thought. You know, we call this like an auto response. You can call it a triggered response. Because you know there's things that if your husband or your wife or your parent or whatever, go back when you were a kid, that if you said something, that you knew the reaction that was coming because it was a triggered response. If you're married, you know that you've got them and the spouse has them. Yeah. And you push them on purpose sometimes. You know? They trip over one of your tripwires by accident and you set the whole landmines off. Actually, wait, I didn't use that analogy right. They'll trip over one of your tripwires by accident, then you start moving yours in front of them. You know? Or you go over to their tripwires on purpose and go, bing, bing. Oh, you tripped over one of mine? Here you go. I know where yours are too. You know? But if there was space, okay? I'm talking about mental space, like so that you have time to think before responding. if you can create that space, then you can let the mind of Yeshua be there to respond. You also may realize you have other choices than the one you would have just gone to do, right? But it's so hard because the emotions get triggered and then you're just off to the races, all right? Because a lot of you are like, well, I don't know why I struggle to be like Yeshua, to do this, because you don't have any self-awareness. Or I shouldn't say that, but we have very little self-awareness, okay? We get a little bit self-aware after the event. We have very little self-awareness while things are happening, okay? Because we're so aware of the other person or the other things. It's got all of our whole capacity, in our awareness level, that we can't be aware of ourselves. And so you have to practice. This is a practicable thing. You have to, make the effort to practice being aware of you, not just the other person. So I'm interacting with my wife, and we're having, I know you don't believe this, but we're having a little heated moment, okay? And she's focused on me, and I'm focused on her, and neither one of us are focused on ourselves to think about other choices, other ways to respond, other things to do. What can I do now? Okay? Because we are so well trained and practiced because of the repetitive nature of the responses that these habits are just instantaneous reactions. Okay? But what if you could be aware, wow, that offended me, that upset me, I'm angry. Wait a minute, I don't have to be angry, I could choose something else. I mean, can we get to a place where you can start thinking about what just happened and how you're feeling and be aware of you and not just the other person? Can you be aware of yourself? Because once you're aware of yourself, you can look at yourself and say, why am I angry? Why am I hurt? Why am I offended? Why do I feel insecure? What am I afraid of? What negative thing am I feeling? Why is that? Well, because the person did, no, well, wait, they did that. But that doesn't mean I have to respond that way, all right? This isn't about you being aware and then arguing with yourself, well, look what they just did. Well, are there other options on how I can react to whatever it is they just did? Can I think about maybe from where they were coming from, what they did sort of made sense? It came out of whatever other pain they were in. Because sometimes you walk into a buzzsaw when you show up and you see your spouse, and your spouse has already had a horrible day, or something just happened, and guess what? They couldn't get it out on the person, that whatever the situation was, so you get smacked with it. And if you had enough self-awareness, you may be able to think, whoa, okay, maybe that wasn't really directed at me. Let me be more aware of, I wonder why she's so upset. Especially if you're pretty strongly convinced it wasn't you, at least not to generate the level of reaction, right? So then, instead of thinking about what you feel now that you got smacked with some verbal, some whatever it was, instead you can think, wow, that person's in a not good place. They need a hug. They need something. They don't need me to blast them right back into oblivion, okay? But instead, your self-awareness is, I'm mad, I'm hurt, I'm this, like, how dare you? I can't, oh, here we go, and you're ready to go to war. And instead of thinking, wow, I feel so bad that you're that upset. I wonder what's causing that. I know it wasn't me. And if it was, I better know how to fix it, because I should apologize immediately and fix that. Does that make sense? But we still struggle with all of this. And, I know somebody said they're going, you haven't really quoted except one verse this whole time. Be quiet. All right? See, you're only thinking of you. And you're not realizing all of this is for you, and the one who ever's thinking that way needs this more than the other person. You do. Look, I'm trying to give you something that you're not getting anywhere, okay? You can get people teaching you out of the book all day long, and that's great, and probably half of it's right, maybe, and that's fine, okay? And I've given you 500 teachings about all of this, but you're all still struggling, and you don't know why you're struggling, and I'm trying to help you understand. we are in such a high speed that none of us really does the thing we're told to do as a kid, which is think before you speak. Think before you act. Because if you were to do that, you could think, what would Yeshua do? How would his mind handle this situation? Not like what would he literally do, think about the life of Messiah, but if I had his mind, how would his mind respond to what's going on? So you got to slow things down and create some time space. Sounds like Einstein now, creating time space, and okay. But that's what you need to do, though. As soon as you're feeling that, a trigger that makes you kind of bow up and go at it and raise your voice and everything else, slow down. Hold on. Wait a minute. Because you should already know that only makes things worse. Right? I have that shirt. Actually, I got a closet full of those. Okay? And I don't think I've ever remembered doing anything positive. Okay? Whether it was me or my wife or anybody else I've interacted with, it's never brought any kind of a good result. So why go down a path you already know isn't going to work? Because I'm going to get my justice and my pound of flesh, and how dare you, and blah. Oh, stop that. It's not getting you anywhere. If you can't have that discussion where the other person can actually receive it, then you're just wasting your breath. Now, I'm not saying don't ever have the discussion where you make your point and say, hey, I really would rather you didn't do this the next time this situation like this comes up. And the person can go, okay, I'm sorry, whatever it is. But once the emotional triggers have gone and everybody's angry now, upset, offended, whatever, there's nothing positive coming out of that. All you're doing is throwing gas on the fire. Okay? And that's not Yeshua-like, and that's not the body needing that. And by the way, this is not just like husband and wife, although that's the greatest center place, right? You start with the house, and then you deal with the relationships outside the house. But I got congregation members aren't talking to each other. I got congregation members avoiding each other. But they haven't really dealt with their stuff. And I'll say, did you talk to the other person? No. Well, they should know, blah, blah, blah. Oh, stop. Okay? Either we're going to understand, okay, I want to go back to something Billy said last week when during the afterburn, I guess it was, when he talked about, there are things that when he's with me that he doesn't always understand, but he's trusting, and then later he may understand it and see how it plays out. We have to do the same thing with what Yahweh has given us to do. He has made it clear, maybe you have a doubt of this, but I think he's made it clear that eventually we're all going to live together forever. Can we agree? But we don't even like each other now. So we're going to not like each other forever? There's no joke here. We don't even like each other. We don't like to be around each other. We don't seek each other's company. I'm not talking about the little cliquey groups that we have, this little group likes each other and this little group likes each other. That always happens. Because you find that person that you're comfortable with is comfortable enough with you, and so you're friends. But there's still going to be people in here that you don't like, that you're not comfortable with, that you don't want to be around. That's not the body. And this is what forever is going to look like? I don't think so. Okay? But we're not ready, in terms of our maturity to know how to do that. And it comes back to Philippians. We're not transformed enough into his image to have his mind really up here. Okay? If we did, we would act differently. Okay? And by the way, I don't know if this is, I think it's a good way to put this. Because I study this all the time, right? I'm studying how the mind works, how the body works, why we do and everything else. Somebody made a couple of teachers out there have made this point. There's a difference between the brain and the mind, okay? So I'm going to break it down in this way. The brain is your thinking, okay? That's thinking, your thought. Your heart is the emotions. The mind is those two combined, because that's where action comes out of, okay? Because you have a thought and an emotion which creates a mindset, okay? A mindset. So we're going to let the mind of Yeshua be in you. So it means an emotional reaction to a thought combined. So a Yeshua-like thought and emotion together. That's important. You need to get that, okay? Probably for the memers out there, like Jet and them, put that together, okay? Because we're told that you think, if you dwell on that thought enough, an emotion will be attached to it. And then if you have the emotion that's strong enough with the thought, an action will come out at some point. Repetitive actions form habits, habits form destinies, right? We talked about that a lot. But now I want you to understand that when it says, let the mind of Yeshua be in you, we're talking about the first thought part and the emotion part combined. That we've already decided the thought was appropriate with the right emotion. And that's a mindset, okay? That's the mind of Yeshua. So I don't want you to think about just the mind of Yeshua being how he thought. I think it's better to say that we're talking about his mindset, his thoughts and emotions appropriate to the thing that was going on. Is that making more sense now? Okay? So that's what, and by the way, all of you, when you listen to these teachings, just like I do when I listen to everybody out there that I listen to, and when you wonder, don't ask me who I listen randomly to a lot of different stuff all the time, as Abba puts things in front of me, that I think, now I want you to understand when I'm listening, I'm looking for that one thing, and what I just gave you may have been that one thing you needed to hear. Don't worry about the rest of it was something you didn't need, whether it was me or some other teacher, but you're looking for that one thing that you go, wow, I can use that. Now I understand better whatever it is I'm dealing with, whatever it is. To understand that when it says let the mind, because some of you might be, what does that mean, let the mind of Yeshua be in you? It means that he only entertains appropriate thoughts, he takes the others into captivity, and then attaches the appropriate emotion to the thought together. So now they're combined together, and that's a mindset. That's a mindset. And that's how you have his mind in you. But you have to understand what thoughts are appropriate in Yeshua's sense. What emotions would be the right emotions. The negative ones are absolutely not there. No fear, no anxiety, no insecurity, no offense, no shame. Okay? And so I think this is very, very important that we, because I want to go on here to to the next part of this thing here, but I don't think we really addressed that, enough, and I have a habit lately of rehashing a whole chapter we just did and spending a whole lot of teaching on it. So this is actually part 37b, okay? Even though I didn't really read more than just Philippians 2:5, but, and I never actually turned there, I just quoted it to you. But I think that's really what's important. We have to have a conscious effort, and the biggest part of it is through the practice of self-awareness. What am I thinking? What am I feeling about what I'm thinking? Okay? Your thoughts are vibrational. Your thoughts are things. Okay, and because they vibrate, they don't just stay in your head. They float around out there into the universe, okay? And you wonder, I'm going to give a weird example. I think it's good. Anybody see the very lousy, I think it was Ghostbusters 2 or whatever it was, where the stuff was coming out underneath New York City. It was all negative, emotional stuff manifested as a thing. I think that's actually real. I don't mean the Ghostbusters thing. I mean the idea that when you're in a place with positive people and good energy and all that stuff's going on, we tend to feed off of it. But you look at the inner cities and you look at these cities that are falling apart and on fire all the time, it's a contagious, negative, awful mindset, right? Thoughts and emotions, mindset that they're all trapped in. And that's why you don't see this everywhere. It's not just because they're poor. You go to some very poor places that don't have any of this stuff. Okay, you go to some really poor places that have no crime and no violence. But there's a mindset that has the negative emotion of anger and this and whatever else is there connected to thoughts to point the finger and blame everybody, whatever it is. And that's contagious. It spreads. It's because those thoughts don't just stay in your head. And then if you're swimming in nothing but that, because everybody around you has that level of anger and fear and insecurity and blame and everything else, eventually you tune into it. Your vibration will tune in and receive that stuff. And that's when someone says, can you believe blah, blah, blah? And you go, yeah, really, yeah, wow. Can you believe that either? And next thing you know, now 2 people are mad, then 3, then 5, then whatever. And then you have a mob forming and they don't even know why they're there. Because they didn't have anything to do with the real reason originally. It's just incredible. I mean, if you don't know what I'm talking about, how do you go from, in general, a group of people that understand that stealing's illegal, you can get arrested, to the looting that goes on when the emotion mindset gets to a certain place? Because all of a sudden they're not thinking about stealing anymore. It's justice, it's this, it's that. Their mindset has gone into such a delusional place that they no longer think stealing is what they're doing. It's justified in some way. And they've tuned into this thing and it then spreads. So then a rational person sees this going on and they're like, they're taking it, nobody's bothering them, I'll take it too. They're not thinking anymore. And of course, we know how not connected at all that is to what actually happened. A police officer killed somebody. So we're robbing stores and setting buildings on fire. How is that? See, there's no connection. Okay? You want to go stand in front of, government offices and protest and get them to change the laws to protect things and everything else? That's great. Okay? Or demand for something. It's the emotion to a wrong thought needing an outlet. And then it's contagious. And so then what do you see? You see things and you go, why would they do that in response to this? By the way, this goes the other way. I've watched downtowns destroyed celebrating a team's victory of a professional sport, championship. And they're supposed to be happy. The next thing you know, they're wrecking the whole downtown someplace. Wrecking cars, wrecking this, but they're celebrating. Doesn't make any sense because this is not in reality, right? We come back to the whole point. Like the subtitle to today should be like, look, if you're going to get the mindset of Yeshua, to do so brings you to full reality. You want to live in reality, all right? And in reality, guess what? You have to give up some things. In reality, you have to accept that some things that even though they might bring you some joy, you just can't have them, or you can't do them. I don't know why everything bad for you tastes so good. But so I can get Jet off my case and lose all this, I'm going to have to give up some things that taste good. I'll certainly cut them back. Or just recognize that they don't taste as good as I think I do. I think they do because I've actually messed my taste buds up by eating so much junky stuff. It does. It changes your taste buds. Okay, if you've done this, you know what I'm talking about. If you ever were someone who drank sodas, like Coke, Pepsi, whatever you drank, if you stopped drinking them for a period of time and go to drink it again, it tastes awful. Okay? Meanwhile, when you were drinking it all the time, there was nothing like, having that French fry and a Coke. And you just thought it was the greatest taste ever. But if you don't drink it for a while, it used to give me a hiccup. My wife can tell you. When I didn't drink soda for a long time and I go and have that first sip, it always made me hiccup. Just for that first sip, like my body telling me, what are you doing? Why did you just put that down my throat? You're supposed to use that to clean off the connections on your battery in your car. It's not supposed to go down your throat. You're supposed to use that to get the bugs off your windshield. By the way, that's real good uses for it. You got a lot of junk all over your battery connections in your car? Pour some Coke on it, burn it right off. All those bugs on your windshield, and when it really gets bad driving through the mountains, you get a lot of bugs on your windshield, can of Coke, just hose it down so you don't leave it all sticky. After you're done, it'll wipe it right off. It'll eat right through all that stuff. Think of what it's doing in your stomach. Okay? But see, we don't even realize that even what we think our tastes are not real. We've altered them. Okay? I remember people seeing me over the years and asking me, if I drink beer. And I said, no. And they said, why? I said, because it was going to take too much effort. They go, what do you mean? I said, nobody liked their first beer or their second or their third. It's an acquired taste. They said, why do I want to make that kind of effort? You know how much money I've saved? Because it was going to take an effort. And I just, same reason why I don't drink coffee. I can't figure out the formula. Because, okay, when you drink a lot of it, you eventually get to black. No more formula. It's just black coffee. All right? And I watch people who drink a lot. They get less and less sweet, less and less cream or whatever, and they get black eventually. Fine. I'm new. I don't drink a lot of coffee. I'm not new. I'm 58 years old. But I mean, when I don't drink a lot of coffee, so if I want to sit with my wife, we go to get the coffee, and I'm like, I don't know how much cream to put, I don't know how much sugar, and then it tastes too sweet or too bitter, not enough. And I just give up. After 2 sips of trying to make it right, I just get up. I said, forget it. Okay? And that's really the problem we have, is the things that we should make the effort in. If there's any challenge or toughness to it, we just say, forget it. It's too much work. Go the easy route. All right? Go the easy route. And so, let's be careful with that. Okay, let's go to John 13. John 13. Excuse me. John 13 and verse 34. A new or renewed command I give you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. Now, I know that in some places they write renewed, some places it says new. In some ways it is new. The newness being, I don't want you just to love each other. I want you to do it as I have loved you. In other words, I want you to think of things in a little bit different way than maybe you thought of it before, is what he's telling them. He says, I want you to love one another is not new. It goes back to Leviticus, it goes back all the way to the beginning. But he's saying, look, but I want you to love each other as I have loved you. Okay, so then we have to think about how Yeshua has loved you. Not just what you see in Scripture, but how he's loved you. Remember, it says, you have to, none come except the Father draws, and then he says, and then none come to the Father except through him. And so you're finding the Father was through a process of the two of them first getting your attention, and then once your attention was understood and you were drawn to seek the truth, the word, the Torah, the light, okay, the way, that then that would lead you back to the Father. But in doing all of this, okay, he's saying, think about what he did for you in that process, how he loved you when you know what you were like before. Forget about what you're like now. Remember what you were like before? And he loved you anyway. And he was willing to be patient with you and forgive you. I mean, all those things. So he says, a renewed command I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also should love one another that way. Okay? You know, we had a guy that used to attend a long time ago, and when I first met him, he said, I know there's a lot of Torah stuff, but right now I'm just, he didn't like to get into the more complex, deep arguing things. When I say deep, I mean like the things that people get all impressed with because they're more complex and symbology and all that. He said, look, I'm still trying to figure out how to love you. He said, I don't need to figure all that other stuff out. A couple years later, he changed it to, I'm trying to figure out how to love you as Yeshua loves me. So he made that distinction, okay? 35, he says, by this shall all know that you are my taught ones, if you have love for one another. Now, people like to quote verse 35, but they're not doing it in the context of verse 34. So it's not just that they will know we're his students because we love each other. There's a lot of cultish groups out there that you look at and they all love each other. Matter of fact, some of them do a better job of it than we do, okay? In terms of visibly showing that we love each other. That it's clear that we care and that we're, treating each other with the right level of treatment. But he's saying, look, they're going to know you're my disciples, my taught ones, if you love one another as I have loved you. That's a whole different level. The esteeming others above themselves level. The willingness to sacrifice yourself for someone else level. Okay? That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So, and again, that ties into what we were just saying. That's why I had this right after the Philippians discussion, right after that to come right to this. Because to do this, what do you need to do this? What do you need? The mindset of Yeshua. For those who are listening, I pointed to my head, so I gave them a hint. Okay? You need the mindset of Yeshua. So, you could read John and be like, oh yeah, well I love people in the body and stuff, but do you love them this way? Okay? That's the key. So that's going to close us up for today because it's already an hour and 5 minutes. So that's good. So let me go from this and we'll wrap it together and pray. This is the most important stuff. The mechanics are not unimportant. They're easy. Okay? Let me never diminish the mechanics, but they should be doable. Look, it's kind of like when you started learning how to drive, right? Remember learning how to drive? And when you first started driving, you were looking in your mirrors and you were looking here and you didn't remember where to push the button for the radio and you're thinking about everything. What foot's the gas? What's the brake? Now you're driving and all of a sudden you're home. You don't even know how you got there. You left work, your mind got on something else, you got on a phone call, you thought nothing about the drive, and now you're in the driveway. Because the mechanics of driving eventually become mindless. You're on autopilot. You don't have to really think a whole lot consciously. Now you were still paying attention and you saw the cars and made the turns and stopped at the lights and the stop signs or whatever you did. So it's not like you just ignored everything, but you didn't have to think about it in a conscious way. So the mechanics of Torah observance is very much the same thing. Now you got to do the same thing with the harder stuff. The mechanics of loving each other as he loves you. So that's why we're spending all this time on this, because this is the stuff, if we're going to be honest, we struggle with. Now, we don't struggle with Sabbath keeping generally, unless you have a boss that keeps trying to get you to break it and stuff. And that's just a matter of changing jobs or whatever you need to do. We don't really struggle with kashrut except for somebody that has a love affair with shrimp or something. But I mean, you can get over that too. Because after all, nowadays we end up having all kinds of foods that we could eat that we have love affairs with that we can't eat because we've got gluten issues or this allergy or that allergy. And next thing you know, you can't eat anything that you like anyway. So we can get over that. So the mechanics is not really the hard thing, okay? Sometimes we struggle not knowing, like, well, how do I do this, or what do I do this, or where, or when, or whatever. So you learn. You're just missing information. But once you get the information, when the feasts are, how the Sabbath is, I mean, it's not that hard to move from Sunday to Saturday. You know Saturday's the Sabbath, Sunday's not, you move. This isn't rocket science. Oh, but how I feel about you and how I treat you and how I feel when you treat me and this whole loving the neighbor thing, that's a hard one. Okay, and I gave you a lot today to listen back to and understand so you can let this mind be in you. Because without that mind, the mind of Yeshua in you, you can't love me as he loves me, and I can't love you as he loves you. Okay? And that's the important thing. So when I'm dealing with you, I need to be asking myself, how would Yeshua treat that person? Because he loves that person. I don't at the moment, but he does. Well, because that's the way you feel at that moment, right? Or you'll say something really cute like, well, I still love you, but I don't like you. Oh, that makes me feel so much better. Thank you. That explains the frying pan that just went by my head. But you still love me, though. Okay, so, we need to work that through, because this is the hard parts. This is the hard stuff. And I know I didn't read a lot of verses, but it's trying to explain what he's trying to get you to understand. Because this is not the mechanics of do or don't do. This is a transforming, becoming process, and you becoming him, all right? So it's not like if the person does something and then you have something actually physically that you do, that's a mechanical thing, or mechanically certain words that you say. No, it's understanding how would Yeshua think, feel, and what would his mindset be about the person while going through or faced with the same situation. And there's a lot more emotions involved in that than there are in the mechanical stuff, which makes it tougher. Because once those negative emotions, all right? I don't want to, I'm going to quote another, like the Star Wars thing, the whole thing about the dark side of the Force. What do they always say about the dark side? It's powerful. Because negative emotions are powerful. And what does it also say about the dark side? Again, I'm not talking about this being, I'm just using a metaphor here. What else did it say about it? It's very tempting. It's tempting to be drawn into that place. And then once you're there, it's hard to come out of it. Think about that with your emotions, the same thing, okay? I don't want you to think about them like they're the force or something. I'm just saying, but think about it. They're tempting, they're extremely powerful, and they're hard to escape from when you're in them. So best to first learn how to avoid getting in them, and then find someone that can help you get out of them when you get stuck in them. Okay? That's where we go for counsel. That's where being a real friend who loves you can be a handy thing. So by the way, so if your friend comes to you, blah, 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 okay, don't just join in with them. Yeah, how about finding a way to get them out of that negative place? And then maybe you'll hear the truth of what happened instead of keeping them in that terribly tempting, dark, place. Because they get stuck there. That's really not good. You don't want to get stuck in one of those places. And it doesn't have to be just like anger. It could be insecurity, fear, doubt, all these other things, anxiety. Horrible when you get stuck there. I counsel people on a regular basis that have been stuck a long time. And it's hard to get out. It is really hard. All right, amen? Father, we come before you. And Father, we want so much to have Yeshua's mind in us. to be able to see things as he sees them, to feel about them the way he would feel about them. And so, Father, help us to be much more self-aware, to create that space that we have time to think and ask the questions that are necessary to appropriately respond and act to what's going on around us. Father, we know and accept that these are the harder things to do, that these are those things that will prepare us that much more for the kingdom, so that we can be those that, as Yeshua mentions here, that we would be known as his students because of the type of love we have for one another, that Yeshua-like love. So, Father, help us to live in reality, but have mercy and don't give it to us all at once. Because if we're really way out of reality, a lot of it at the same time could really be enough to throw you over the edge. But Father, help us to get more and more in reality. So that, Father, that we can see you as you are, appreciate what you've offered us in the fullness and genuineness of even understanding what you've offered us. So that we can, with excitement and joy, anticipate all of the gatherings, all of your events, all of the times we get to spend with you and spend with each other, and have that be the greatest joy to look forward to at all times. So, Father, we thank you. We praise you. We continue to ask your patience and mercy and compassion on us as we come before you in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. Amen.